This is Glenn Whittingham, House of Fern, and you are listening to Do You Know Who You Are? The courts have ruled that we're all kings and queens, and so and that's what we're going to talk about today. Every week we go through at least one of my presentations. I have a group of about 10 or 12 presentations that I go through as part of my private information shares when I go out and visit people. And so this is, we'll start off with the private information share on citizenship. If you want to know more about this stuff, I have a couple groups. They're both called Administrating Your Public Servants. Those are separate words at Yahoo and at Google. And also, I've got a group at this station that you're listening to, actually, these Changing Times Radio. I've got a group there too as well, and it's called sovereigntyinternational.info. And so my contact information is there as well. And so, anyways, so let's get started. And what we're going to talk today about is about citizenship, and it's about sovereignty, how we're all kings and queens. And so where does sovereignty come from? Sovereignty exists because of common law. And common law is common everywhere in the world. I've seen court cases that talk about it in law books. Common law is common everywhere, and it's basically, it's the people's law. It basically, if you think about it, why do people set up the governments for in the first place? In other words, we the people set up the government, and what happens is we set up the government for protection. It's a lot of people consider it a protection racket, and to some degree it is. But anyways, we set up the governments for protection from foreign enemies, protection from each other. In other words, from foreign enemies, obviously it's national defense and that kind of thing. Protection from each other is so that if I assault someone, then someone's going to come and arrest my butt and take me down and put me on trial for assault or murder or whatever I do. And so that's protection from each other. And then there's also to administer disputes among us. In other words, if I cause someone injury, for example, I run over their dog or their cat, well, so they can sue me or whatever, and get some sort of a remedy from the courts. And so, if you think about it, the only legitimate function for government is protection. Anyway, so that exists because common law, and common law exists everywhere, but especially common law of England and all common law countries, which means the Commonwealth of Nations, which is over 100 countries around the world are considered Commonwealth of Nations, United States, and then any country that the United States has liberated, which I say tongue-in-cheek, because that's certainly open to debate. Anyways, any country that the United States has invaded and conquered, essentially, like, for example, Philippines, Japan, China. There was a common law in China, although there was a revolution there, so I am not sure about what it is now, but there's even evidence of it in the United States Code. There's a reference to a former U.S. District Court for the District of China. And so Iraq now would have common law, so would Afghanistan. Saudi Arabia was once part of the British Empire, so it has common law. Israel, Egypt, all these countries have common law. Now, there's been a revolution, and I'm not sure exactly how that would affect it. But common law, in Egypt they've had a recent revolution, so now that I'm not sure how that affects it. But common law was there. It may not be there now, but it was. So, anyways, common law was brought into England with the Magna Carta, and I have a quote here from the Commentaries on the Laws of England by Sir Edward Coke. And it existed prior to the Magna Carta, and it had probably been around from the beginning of time. If you think about it, the Bible even talks about common law. And common law is basically the Ten Commandments codified, or it's not even codified; it's the unwritten law. But the common law says I can do anything I want as long as I don't damage someone's person or their property, and that's what common law is. So, anyways, here's a citation from the book is called "The First Parts of the Institutes of the Laws of England" by Sir Edward Coke, and he lived from 1552 to 1634. Quote: "The law of England is divided into three parts: the common law, which is the most general and ancient law of the realm; statutes or acts of Parliament; and particular customs." And it goes on to say, "The common law appeareth in the statute Magna Carta and other ancient statutes, which for the most part are affirmations of the common law." Unquote. So it says the common law appears in the statute in the Magna Carta and other ancient statutes, which for the most part are affirmations of the common law. In other words, they affirm it. They recognize something that exists, has been there all along. Okay, that's what an affirmation is. Okay, it recognizes something that was there before. In the Canadian Handbook for Judges on page 97, it says, quote, "Canada is part of what we call the common law world, and England provided the fountain from which the common law emerged. Thousands of English decisions are now, by adoption, embedded in our jurisprudence, and the decisions of the House of Lords and other English courts will continue, we think, to be cited in our courts, and must be given the most careful and respectful consideration as highly persuasive." Unquote. On page 98 of the same book, it says, quote, "The judgments of Australian and New Zealand courts may also have highly persuasive effect, and the similarity not just of the legal system but of conditions in the United States is such that many American decisions may too have a strong persuasive effect." Unquote. The courts look at these other court cases, and what we're talking about here now is a basic fundamental principles of law, okay, that exist everywhere. And when I was living in Ontario, there's a friend of mine that I met when I was living in Ontario by the name of Patrick Ellis. This was in the mid 1990s, and Patrick Ellis did court work, and he did lawsuits and that kind of stuff. Anyways, he showed me how to do a lawsuit because I had an issue with Canada Customs, and so he showed me how to do a lawsuit, and so I was actually in the Court of Appeals, Ontario Court of Appeals, and I was in there. I was making copying paperwork for my appeal, and I was in this. It was a Staples or someplace like that, one of these office place, bookstore or stores where you make copies. And I was making copies, and there was this lawyer in there, and he sees my paperwork. He says, "Oh, you're in the Court of Appeals?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "My case is based on the fact that the people are sovereign." And he says, "Oh yeah." He says, "Everybody knows that." The point is that it's well recognized that everybody is sovereign. We're all sovereigns. And if you don't know it, it's just because of your own ignorance. If you think about it. And that's what this is. The whole purpose of this thing is to educate you about the fact that you're the king or the queen, as applicable. And they tell us all the time, when we're dealing with the police or whoever, okay, they tell us all the time, quote, "Anything you say can or will be used against you in a court of law." Okay? So what is so difficult about that? Okay? They're telling you right up front that if you say anything, we're going to use it against you. So they're basically telling you that you're the king, you're sovereign, and you don't have to tell us anything. But every day people give evidence against themselves and do all this stuff, and that's why, quite frankly, they went and put in our system that I'm sovereign, because once you take away their presumptions, everything's under martial law, and we'll talk about that on another week further down the road. We'll go through my presentation on martial law. Everything's under martial law, and martial law is voluntary too, believe it or not. And so everything's under martial law, and once you understand that, you don't have to participate. But they have a right to presume certain things. Martial law works on presumption, and they have the right to presume certain things. And a lot of it's because of our own ignorance of the law. They pass laws because they're bankrupt, and we're going to talk about that too. Because they're bankrupt, they pass laws that really don't apply to anybody, and they know they don't apply to anybody. But because they're bankrupt, think about it. When any corporation goes bankrupt, then the stock becomes worthless, and they become owned by their creditors. The creditors become the new owners. And so who's the creditors? The creditors are the international bankster thieves. And so they have to do things to help their international bankster thief owners make some money. And so they pass laws. They have an oath of office. Their oath of office really trumps everything. So they're very careful on the wording of these laws. They're really not laws, in fact. And we'll talk about that in our presentation on color of law. So anyways, they pass laws that really don't apply to anybody, and you get involved in them, and it's viewed to be a contract. You agreed to it. You're supposed to know the law, and that's exactly what happens. And irregardless of whether you get involved in them or not, so many people are out there so clueless that and they got involved in it, that it's to the point now that they can just automatically presume you're involved in it. And so and that's why they put me down as solvent, because I noticed them that I am not involved in your contracts. I am not one of your slaves, and that's what I do. And that's what we'll talk about also with my presentation on asserting your sovereignty, because I have a procedure that I developed that I notice them. I tell them, you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-cop. And once you notice them, okay, everything changes, okay, because they know you're sovereign. And once you notice them, they no longer have what's known as plausible deniability. And now you can go after them criminally, okay? And they know it. And that's why they put me down as sovereign in their system, because they're essentially telling all of their subordinates that if you mess with this guy, he's going to hurt you. And I'll do it within the law, and I'll have him in jail, or they'll make me a millionaire. Or any number of different things, and so once you notice them, they got nothing. They can't claim ignorance anymore. So and that's what we're going to talk about now, is how we're sovereign. Okay, so what is a sovereign? We're going to talk about what is a sovereign. Do you know who you are? What is a sovereign? Who is a sovereign? Where does sovereignty come from? The rights and duties of sovereignty. How can you lose your sovereignty, and how can you get it back? And sovereignty is the right to rule. A sovereign can be a king or queen. A sovereign can be a group of people, or it can be a living soul. And here's a court case. This is called Chisholm versus Georgia. This is found at 2 Dallas, page 440. That's in the U.S. Supreme Court reports. 2 Dallas is probably 1798 or 1795 or something like that. Anyways, quote, sovereignty is the right to govern. A nation or state sovereign is a person or persons in whom that resides, unquote. Here's another quote. This is from Yickwo versus Hopkins, 118 U.S. 356. That's actually probably that might be in the 1900s. I'm not sure exactly what year, but at any rate, quote, the very idea that one may be compelled to hold his life or the means of living or any material right essential to the enjoyment of life at the mere will of another seems to be intolerable in any free country where freedom prevails as being the essence of slavery itself, unquote. In a monarchy, the king or queen is sovereign. In a British common law country, the sovereigns are the people. And even all countries started out with the people being sovereigns. Now, even if they have a king or queen, if they started out, but what happens is we get ourselves involved in contracts, and I'm sure you've heard of British subjects, okay, or Chinese subjects, or okay, that's what they used to refer to people as, is he's a British subject. Back in the old days, I'm sure you remember that kind of stuff. Well, that's what citizens are now, okay? Federal citizens are really subjects, and we'll talk about that because there's court cases to talk about. And so So that's what happens if we get ourselves involved in what the courts view to be contracts. We now become subject to the government. We become their slave. Okay, that's literally what happens, and I can show you court cases to talk about that too. And so when we're their property, and they can do literally anything they want. And in the U.S., it's Article 4, Section 2, I think, where it says it talks about other property of the United States. That's exactly what a U.S. citizen is. Other property of the United States. And we're going to talk about that. Okay, this is Dred Scott versus Sanford, 60 U.S. 393. That's like 1857. Quote, the words people of the United States and citizens are synonymous terms and mean the same thing. They both describe the political body who, according to our Republican institutions, form a sovereignty and who hold the power and conduct the government through their representatives. They are what we familiarly call the sovereign people, and every citizen is one of this people and a constituent member of the sovereignty, unquote. Okay, the important thing here is they're talking about this, that this is from a case that took place in 1857, okay? This was just before the Civil War, and it's just before the 14th Amendment, or the so-called 14th Amendment, because when the 14th Amendment came in, it turned everything upside down. We're going to talk about that too. But so citizens and people were the same thing at this time. But later on, a citizen is no longer the people, and we'll talk about that. The same thing exists in Canada and Australia, and I've got court cases that talk about that too. And so, and England, quote, the sovereign people, through their representatives, have created the court and the board as well as the municipal council and have defined the rights and duties of each, unquote. And that's a Canadian court case. Reference Casa Loma, that's in Toronto. And that's 1927. That's found at 4 Dominion Law Reports, page 645. And so, that's a Canadian case. Here's an Australian court case. This is Australian Capital Television versus Commonwealth, found at 66 Australian Reports, page 695. Quote, translated into constitutional terms, it denotes that the sovereign power which resides in the people is exercised on their behalf by their representatives, unquote. So, sovereign power resides in the people, okay? Here's another Australian court case. This is Ridgway versus the Queen, 69 Australian Reports, page 484. Quote, the powers of government in this country are derived from the people who are the ultimate sovereign, unquote. And here's an English court case. This is House of Lords, TNLR number 529 in the United Kingdom, and this is in 1999. And it says, quote, every individual was sovereign over himself, unquote. And so, this idea of sovereignty is not unique to America. It's in every country. And I think it's in every country, including countries that many people think are under civil law, okay, France, for example. I think, again, civil law, we're going to talk about that a little bit, that's really martial law. And so you could actually be a sovereign even in France. I am positive. I don't have court cases to support that, but I'll bet you they're out there. Anyways, here's another one. Quote, the people are sovereign are not bound by general words and statutes restrictive of prerogative right, title, or interest unless expressly named. Acts of limitation do not bind the king or the people. The people have been ceded all the rights of the king, the former sovereign. It is the maxim of common law that when an act is made for the common good and to prevent injury, the king shall be bound, though not named. But when a statute is general and prerogative right would be divested or taken from the king or the people, he shall not be bound, unquote. And that's people versus Herkimer, and that's 4 colon, page 345. That's a New York court case, 1825. Here's another one. Chisholm versus Georgia again. Okay, this is another citation from that same court case that we talked about earlier. That's found at 2 Dallas, page 440. Quote, at the revolution, the sovereignty devolved on the people, and they are truly the sovereigns of the country, but they are sovereigns without subjects, and have none to govern but themselves. The citizens of America are equal as fellow citizens and as joint tenants in the sovereignty. So here's another court case. There's lots of them that talk about this stuff. This one's called Lansing versus Smith, 1829. 4 Wendell, page 9. This is another New York court case. Quote, people of a state are entitled to all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative, unquote. And here's another one, Ohio Life Insurance Company and Telephone Company versus DeBolt. This is 16 Howard, page 416, U.S. Supreme Court again. Quote, it will be admitted on all hands that with the exception of the powers granted to the states and the federal constitution for the constitutions, I should say, let's do that again, quote, it will be admitted on all hands that with the exception of the powers granted to the states and the federal government through the constitutions, the people of the several states are unconditionally sovereign within their respective states, unquote. Unconditionally. That doesn't mean that we can get you into a contract, okay? So all you have to do is bring up that issue, and you watch them scatter. You watch them die for cover, okay? They don't want to talk about that. They will never, ever, ever admit that there's a contract. That's the reason they changed their name, okay? They criminally converted into this all-block capital letters thing, okay? Because they know that you're sovereign. You're the king, okay? They don't want to do anything to cause you injury. That's why they have to create this separate entity, and they have to get you to do it. They would never do it on their own. They have to get you to do it. And that's why there's statutes that say that all persons have to register their birth, okay? Well, if you understood the law that you're not a person, then nobody should be registering their birth. But when you run down and do that, you created that straw man. And then all persons have to get a social security number. All persons have to get a driver's license. You know, that's what their statutes say. Read them and see. And that's what I point out to them all the time, that there's nothing in there saying that I have to get a social security number. That statute's not even positive law. And so these statutes aren't properly enacted. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and you just can poke holes in it all over the place. And until you start bringing up these issues, they'll just walk all over you. And the burden's on the people. You have to know the law. Here's another one. This is Luther versus Borden, found at 48 U.S. 1. So that's probably, that's before the Civil War. But anyways, this is U.S. Supreme Court. Quote, governments are but trustees, acting under derived authority and have no power to delegate what is not delegated to them. But the people, as the original fountain, might take away what they have delegated and entrust to whom they please. The sovereignty in every state resides in the people of the state, and they may alter and change their form of government at their own pleasure, unquote. That doesn't say the sovereignty in every state in America, okay? That says the sovereignty in every state. And delegate, okay? The only power that they have is power that I delegated. I'm the king, and that's what I tell them. I'm the king. The only power you have is power that I delegate. Do I have the power to take your property and give it to some guy down the street because he doesn't have any money? No, I do not, okay? Well, then neither does the government, okay? If they're doing that, you've agreed to it. They've got you in a contract. And so now you got to change their presumptions. You got to notify them and tell them, hey, there's no contract here. And if you do it properly and you stand up for yourself and you stick to your guns, ultimately they're not going to want to talk to you anymore. And that's what they'll do, is they'll put you down. Leave this guy alone. And that's what they did with me. And so, and I'll show you how to do that when we go through our Asserting Your Sovereignty presentation. That'll be probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, because I'll be lucky to get through this one here today. But if I do, I'll only get started on the next one. And it's like 3 presentations or more down the road. So anyways, governments are trustees, and they're only acting under derived authority, and any authority is delegated. That's so important. Quote, a sovereign is exempt from suit not because of any formal conception or obsolete theory, but on the logical and practical ground that there can be no legal right as against authority that makes the law on which the right depends, unquote. And this one's hard to pronounce. Kawanakoa versus Polyblank. That's 205 U.S. 349. That's 1907. Okay, and so the reason, see, I'm the king. You can't even sue me. Okay, in their courts. Okay, and that's the argument I'm going to bring up. I'm immune. You can't sue me. But if I want to bring an action, I have to bring it to the people. Okay, which means a jury of our peers. And in Texas, we've done that, and you can bring an action before a jury of our peers, and it works, and you have no idea the power you have as the people, and we'll talk about that when it comes to a de jure government, the ultimate solution, and that'll be on another presentation. But so I'm exempt. I'm not. You can't sue me. And that's exactly the way I'll be going with it, I'll tell you. Anyways, here's another quote. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," unquote. That's taken from the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And and that is considered positive law, too, by the way. Unalienable rights, not inalienable, unalienable, and there's a difference. And matter of fact, these lawyers, you got to understand, and we'll talk about attorneys and lawyers and stuff when we go through the presentation on that. And so lawyers put together these law dictionaries, and so they go and twist it around the way they want it. Okay, but unalienable means it cannot be alienated under any circumstances, and they know it. Okay. And that's why they have to change your name. That's why they have to criminally convert your name into this all block capital letters fictitious entity, so that they're not violating your rights. They're just doing to this entity. You see what I'm saying? And so you got to understand that this is what's going on. Anyways, the Magna Carta is called a Great Charter of English Liberty, and the Canadian Handbook for Judges cites the Magna Carta on page 77. So I guess what I'm saying, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the Magna Carta, they might laugh at you when you bring up the Magna Carta, but the Magna Carta is very powerful, and you can bring it up. And certainly in Canada, I bring it up in the U.S. too, because what I tell them is that you have caused what I tell them is you're conspiring together to overthrow my de jure government, and I recently sent out a notice to Barack Obama and every member of the Supreme Court and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Vice President and the Speaker of the House and a whole bunch of people, and there are 34 people in the federal government, and I told them that you're overthrowing my government, and the proof of that is the fact that you caused with your martial law Magna Carta is because they were imposing martial law on the people then, the War of Independence, they were imposing martial law on them then, and you're imposing martial law again now. And so it's obvious that you want to overthrow my government, and so again, when you accuse them of this stuff and you do it under penalty of perjury, well, now they've got to do something about it. Anyways, so because now it's in writing and they know it, they don't have plausible deniability anymore. Okay, now they know. They can't say, "Oh, gee, I didn't know." They know. I have proof. They know. Anyways, here on page 77 of the Canadian Handbook for Judges, it says, quote, "Magna Carta says we will not deny or defer any man either justice or right," unquote. Well, that's actually not exactly what it says, but it's close enough, and that's it does say something similar to that. Here's a Canadian court case that talks about the Magna Carta. It says, quote, "The Magna Carta is not a unilateral act emanating solely from the spontaneous will of the king, as the charters of the predecessors of John. Neither is it a treaty, for we cannot say that it was concluded between two legitimate independent sovereignties, nor between two nations, nor is it a law. The barons do not appear in it as subjects, for they are freed from their promise of fidelity, and the king, brought captive, placed before them, submitted to the conditions which the conquerors imposed upon him. Magna Carta is therefore a contract, but resembles a treaty concluded between two nations, in that one of the parties, in virtue of the law of war, can impose its will upon the other, unquote. And that's found in a case called Perlman versus Pichet, an Attorney General of Canada, reference habeas corpus, and that's found at 4 Dominion Law Reports, page 147. That's actually a Quebec court case. So, people say Quebec is under civil law. Well, I disagree. Okay, common law is there, and that's why also I'd say that common law is in France too. And there's a European common law. I am positive there's a French common law. I've seen law books that talk about German common law, Danish common law. There's common law all over the place, and so again, common law is basically the law of the people. Why do people set up governments in the first place? Now there is a United States common law, but it's not common law. Okay, that is basically the decisions of the federal courts, and that is common law from a certain perspective, but it's not the common law I'm talking about. So there's different common laws, and some people say that common law is not Christian and all that other stuff. Well, it is. If it's not, it's because the common law, the people that were there weren't Christian, and so common law is basically the law of the people, is what it really comes down to. It's the law of the people, and it's basically the unwritten law. Anyways, so the Queen or President has the oath of office. We, the people, do not owe allegiance to the Queen or the President. The Queen or the President owes allegiance to the people, and when I send out my documents, that's what I tell them. Whether it's the Queen or the President, I tell them, I don't owe you allegiance. You owe me allegiance, and that's what I tell them. You got to know who you are. Do you know who you are? So there's a hierarchy, okay? So you have God created, he's the King of Kings. He created we the people. We the people created the government. The government created corporations. So we can't tell God what to do. I mean, that's like wasting our time. I kind of get frustrated with him at times, and I'd sure like to tell him what to do. But so neither can the government tell us what to do, okay? We're the king. Okay, they cannot tell us anything, and that's why, remember, the government's only authority is authority that we delegated, and so therefore, I don't have the power to delegate to them the authority to take money from you to give it to some guy down the street, and so if I don't have that power, neither does anybody else, and neither do they have it. Okay, and I can't tell you how many people have said, oh yeah, but how would that poor guy be helped out? That's immaterial. That's not my problem. The problem is that I don't have the power to delegate that to the government, so therefore they don't have it. They can get you on a contract, but that's because of your ignorance. And if you want to voluntarily do it, that's your choice. I mean, it is a free country. You can be a slave if you want. Patty, can we take about a 5-minute break here? Are you there? I think I'll send her an email. Anyways,
Glenn, you are on
yes.
break. You're on break.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
I'll be back.
I had my mic muted.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready to go when you are.
Okay, you've got about a minute. A little bit less than a minute.
Okay.
Okay, you about ready?
Yep.
And go.
All right, we're back. So we were talking about the proper hierarchy, the order of things. God as King of Kings. He created we the people, and we the people created the government, and the government created corporations. That's why they can never be superior to us, and that's why all you have to do is there a contract here? You know, I'm the sovereignty, I'm the king. Under what authority are you doing this? And you start bringing up issues, they will never answer. For one thing, I'll tell you, they'll never ever answer, because if they did, then they'd be admitting to multiple felonies, and they'll try and ignore what you're saying. Anyways, so our rights come from God, and only God can take those rights away. And you know, it's interesting how in Canada, the Communist Party, I mean the New Democratic Party, every once in a while they come out. I can't believe that people actually entertain this stuff, but they do. Anyways, every once in a while they come out and they'll say, they'll put out a thing on the news that how they want to take the God out of the Constitution. And first of all, they can't do that because the Queen has an oath to God, basically. And so, but secondly, but what they're trying to do is if they can take God out of the Constitution, then that takes away that which are rights up for grab. Because if and that's why the genius of the Declaration of Independence, quite frankly, because it talks about God and the Constitution even. It says, we the people do hereby ordain and establish this Constitution. Ordination is a religious thing that goes on with Christians, and so that's exactly why that stuff is put in there, and why they do that stuff, and so they want to take God out of there, because then that puts everything up to grabs. So the bottom line is there's two major classes of citizens. There's state and federal, and this applies in Canada. It's everywhere. And we'll talk about that a little bit here, too. Here's a court case. This is U.S. versus Cruikshank, found at 92 U.S., page 542. A quote, there is in our political system a government of each of the several states and a government of the United States. Each is distinct from the other and has citizens of its own. Here's another court case, McDonald versus State, found at 90 Indiana Reports, page 320. Quote, one may be a citizen of a state and yet not a citizen of the United States. And then it has some court citations, unquote. And here's another court case, quote, there is a clear distinction between national citizenship and state citizenship, unquote. And that's found at Tashiro versus Jordan, and that's at 278 U.S. 123. And here's a recent one, 1993, quote, instead this provision protects only those rights peculiar to being a citizen of the federal government. It does not protect those rights which relate to state citizenship, unquote. And that's Jones versus Timmer, 89 Federal Supplements, page 1226, that's 1993. Here's another quote from that Tashiro versus Jordan. Quote, citizenship of the United States does not entitle citizens to privileges and immunities as citizens of the state. since privileges of one are not the same as the other, unquote. And that's a California Supreme Court, 255 Pacific Reports, page 545. Here's another court case, Maxwell versus Dow, 20 Supreme Court Reports, page 448. Quote, the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States do not necessarily include all the rights protected by the first 8 amendments to the federal Constitution against the powers of the federal government, unquote. So a United States citizen does not have access to the first 8 amendments to the Constitution unless Congress grants that. That's true. The United States citizen doesn't have any rights, actually. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. They got one right. There's only one right. And here it is. This is U.S. versus Valentine, 288 Federal Supplements, page 957, quote, the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen is to residence within the territorial boundaries of the United States, unquote. So a U.S. citizen only has the right to be here, and that's it. Otherwise, other than that, they're a slave. They have no rights at all. The same thing exists in Canada. The charter adopted in 1982 even refers to citizens of Canada. And we'll go through that because in Canada, what's the definition of Canada? Canada is a corporation. And in fact, Canada, the British North America Act, didn't even get royal assent. So therefore, there is no Canada. Anyways, the courts have told us laws of Canada are federal laws, citizens of Canada are federal citizens. Canadians include state citizens and federal citizens. Provincial, Alberta is a state. I can show you court cases that talk about that. Anyways, quote, this is Section 3, Charter of Rights and Freedoms, quote, every citizen of Canada, and it says every citizen of Canada again in Section 6.1, every citizen of Canada, Section 6.2, citizens of Canada, Section 23.1. It's got it all through that Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That charter is not for we the people. That charter is for corporations. Here's a California case, People versus De La Guerra. Quote, it is evidence that they, U.S. citizens, have not political rights which are vested in citizens of the states. They are not constituents of any community in which is vested any sovereign power of government. Their position partakes more of a character of subjects than of citizens. They are subject to the law of the United States, but have no voice in its management. If they are allowed to make laws, the validity of these laws is derived from the sanction of a government in which they are not represented. Mere citizenship they may have, but the political rights of citizens they cannot enjoy, unquote. So it says a whole bunch of things here. It says, first of all, it says that they're subjects, okay? It says their position partakes more of the character of subjects than of citizens, okay? So U.S. citizens are really subjects. And it says they're subject to the laws of the United States but have no voice in its management. Why do you think they go and rig these elections? You have to swear under penalty of perjury, you U.S. citizen, to register to vote. So it's only U.S. citizens that are voting. So who cares what the outcome of the election is? I'm not registered to vote. I would never register to vote. Not as long as I have to swear under penalty of perjury I'm a U.S. citizen. And so they go and rig these elections, and there's nothing wrong with it because the people that are voting don't have any political power. They don't mean nothing. And that's why it's called a democracy, because the republic is here, but the republic only exists for we the people. And it doesn't exist for U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens have a democracy. And here's another court case. This is Colgate versus Harvey, found at 296 U.S. 404, quote, and while the 14th Amendment does not create national citizenship, it has the effect of making that citizenship paramount and dominant instead of derivative and dependent upon state citizenship, unquote. So essentially what they're saying here is that prior to the 14th Amendment, U.S. citizenship was derivative and dependent upon state citizenship, okay? And after the 14th Amendment, it's paramount and dominant. So prior to the 14th Amendment, you had to be a state citizen before you could be a U.S. citizen. And so then that was when it was a good thing to have, okay? That was prior to the 14th Amendment, and that's what they were talking about in the Dred Scott versus Sanford case. Remember, we were talking about that. And then after it became this second-class citizen that really doesn't have any rights, is a piece of property, is a slave, and is paramount and dominant. You can be a U.S. citizen without being a citizen of the state. Here's another court case. This is Bowling versus Commonwealth, 65 Kentucky Reports, page 5, and that's 1867, just after the 14th Amendment. Quote, the 14th Amendment referred to slavery. Consequently, the only persons embraced by its provisions for which Congress was authorized to legislate in the matter were those then in slavery, unquote. And that's true. But what happens is that if you get involved in it, it's viewed to be a contract. You've agreed to it. You're supposed to know the law. Quote, no white person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction or born without those limits and subsequently naturalized under their laws owes his status of citizenship to the recent amendments to the federal Constitution, unquote. And so that's Van Walkenburg versus Brown. That's 43 California Reports, page 43. And so, again, it comes down to the slaves again, okay? But I can tell you that this 14th Amendment is all about slavery. It has nothing to do with race. They're just using that as an issue because what happens is there's another court case called Amistad, and I don't know how many people are familiar with that case, but that's what happened was there was a slave ship that this was before the Civil War. But what happened is there was a slave ship that had to be before the Civil War since it was a slave ship. But anyways, what happened was the slaves revolted and they took over the ship, and they killed all of the people that had captured them except for one, and they said, "Take us back to Africa." And the guy that was doing it sailed in circles off the coast of Virginia until the U.S. Navy found him. And so then what happened is they put him on trial for murder. And the arguments in the case, this case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The arguments in the case were that if they're slaves, they're no different than a dog or a cat. They're property, right? And they're no different than a dog or a cat, and they can't commit murder. And the other alternative is that they're free men, and they had every right to do what they did. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court said is they're all sovereigns. They had every right to do what they did, and then they sent them back to Africa. And so the point is that it doesn't matter what race you are, everybody's a sovereign, and so this 14th Amendment had everything to do with slavery, is what it did, because it wants to convert. They wanted to create this second class of citizen, or they wanted to convert citizenship into the opposite of what the founding fathers intended, and that's been the case ever since. The citizenship in America has been the opposite of what the founding fathers intended, but it's voluntary. You don't have to volunteer. But that's what happened, and we've been under martial law ever since. Here's another one. This is actually found at United States Code. This is non-positive law too, by the way. 42 United States Code, Section 1982. Okay, they even put it in the United States Code. Quote: all citizens of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory as is enjoyed by white citizens thereof, to inherit, purchase, lease, sell, hold, and convey real and personal property, unquote. And so it's talking about U.S. citizens versus white people. And again, they're making it a race issue when really they didn't need to do that, but they did. So anyways, here's another one. Quote: therefore, the U.S. citizens residing in one of the states of the Union are classified as property and franchises of the federal government as an individual entity, unquote. And that's Wheeling Steel Corporation versus Fox, found at 298 U.S. 193. The U.S. Supreme Court case again. Here's another one. Quote: a U.S. citizen upon leaving the District of Columbia becomes involved in interstate commerce as a resident does not have the common law right to travel of a citizen of one of the several states, unquote. and that's Hendrick versus Maryland, and that's South Carolina Reporters Road, page 610 to 625, 1914. Now, the significance of that is they're talking about a common law right to travel of a citizen of one of the several states. So again, if you're a state citizen, they don't have anything to say about your right to travel. Okay, that's another reason that that's one of the court cases I actually put in my documents. Here is talking about residence. Okay, this is from the Law of Nations, a book called The Law of Nations, written by a guy by the name of Vattel. This is Book 1, Chapter 19, Section 213, page 87. And it says, quote, residents as distinguished from citizens are aliens who are permitted to take up a permanent abode in the country, being bound to the society by reason of their dwelling in it. They are subject to its laws so long as they remain there, and being protected by it, they must defend it, although they do not enjoy all the rights of citizens. They have only certain privileges which the law or custom gives them. Permanent residents are those who have been given the right of perpetual residence. They are a sort of citizen of a less privileged character and are subject to society without enjoying all its advantages. Their children succeed to their status, for the right of perpetual residence given them by the state passes to their children. So, unquote. So, they're talking about these subjects again, okay? And that's why they always want to know, where's your residence? Well, I don't have a residence. I have an abode, okay? And there's a difference, and that's why. Quote, after the adoption of the 14th Amendment, a bill which became the first Civil Rights Act was introduced in the 39th Congress, the major purpose of which was to secure to the recently freed Negroes all the civil rights secured to white men. None other than citizens of the United States were within the provisions of the Act, unquote. And that's Haig versus CIO, found at 307 U.S. 496. Okay, that's got to be in the 1900s for sure. That's probably in the late 1900s. 307, book 307. I'm not sure what it's up to, but it's certainly got to be in the late 1900s for sure. Anyways, so the Civil Rights Act is not for state citizens. Again, state citizens have unalienable rights. It's only U.S. citizens that have civil rights. Here's another one, quote, it might be correctly said that there is no such thing as a citizen of the United States. A citizen of any one of the states of the Union is held to being called a citizen of the United States, although technically and abstractly there is no such thing, unquote. And that's Ex parte Frank Knowles, found at 5 California Reports, page 300. So a U.S. citizen is a fictitious entity, and that's exactly what it is. But think about it. If a U.S. citizen is a fictitious entity, and this is when I went to the Supreme Court, I told them that a U.S. citizen is a Title 15, United States Code, Section 44, unincorporated corporation. And they admitted that. They said, what they did is they waived their right to respond, the U.S. Department of so-called Justice. And by doing that, they admitted everything. They essentially said, yeah, we know about that, so what? And so the point is that it's a fictitious entity. It's no race. It's a fictitious entity. And if you're a fictitious entity, I mean, think about it. It's a corporation or something like that, and that's property, okay? That belongs to somebody. That's, if you read those old court cases before the Civil War that where slavery was the issue, the debate in the case is always over property rights, okay? A slave is a slave because he's property. That's the bottom line here, okay? A slave is a slave because he's property. And so, I'm not interested in being anybody's property. I'm sorry. Now, you can be a national without being a citizen. And the U.S. passport application even talks about it. And I recently, I'm going to get a U.S. passport here pretty soon. I've just made up an affidavit. I got to go get it notarized. But in there, I talk about this because you can be a national without being a citizen. And the passport application talks about it. It says in where you sign the thing, it says, I declare on penalty of perjury all the following. Number one, I'm a citizen or non-citizen national of the United States. Well, okay. So there you go. I'm a national. I'm not a citizen. I'm an American national, and so that's one of the things that I'm putting in this affidavit, because I'm not going to be one of your low-life scumbag U.S. citizens. And here it talks about it again in the instructions. It talks about non-citizen nationals. And here's a court case that talks about that. Nationality is common law. Okay, quote. It is, however, true that in all common law countries it has always and consistently been held that the wife and minor children take the nationality of the husband and father. That is common law doctrine, unquote. And that's Henry Page, 12 Federal F2D, which is Federal Reports, page 135, second edition. Here's another court case, Chisholm versus Georgia again. Quote, in doing this, I shall have occasion incidentally to events how true it is that states and governments were made for man, and at the same time how his creatures and servants at first deceived, next vilified, and at last oppressed their master and maker. Let a state be considered as subordinate to the people, and everything else be subordinate to the state, unquote. That's Chisholm versus Georgia, 2 Dallas, page 440. That's like 1795. Here is now my unalienable rights aren't defined anywhere. Okay, common law. Okay, and that's what common law is all about. Okay, and this is a court case that talks about that. This is U.S. versus Morris. This is found at 125 Federal Reports, page 322. Quote. Every citizen and freeman is endowed with certain rights and privileges to enjoy, which no written law or statute is required. These are fundamental or natural rights recognized among all free people, unquote. In order to be a member of the sovereignty, in order for a member of the sovereignty, how do you lose your sovereignty, okay? In order for a member of the sovereignty to become subject to regulation anyway, they must agree to it. You have to agree to it. As with any contract, it must be knowing, willing, and intentional. And so that's what you bring up. You didn't disclose this. Matter of fact, all you really need to do is say, is there a contract here? And you just watch them scatter. I can't tell you how many times I've done that, and that's exactly what happens. Here's a court case, Cruden versus Neal. This is found at 2 North Carolina Reports, page 338. Quote, the state citizen is immune from any and all government attacks and procedure absent contract. See Dred Scott versus Sanford, 60 U.S., 19 Howard, page 393. Or as the Supreme Court has stated clearly, quote, every man is independent of all laws except those prescribed by nature. He is not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow men without his consent, unquote. And here's another one. This is City of Dallas versus Mitchell, found at 245 Southwest Reports, page 944. Quote, the rights of individuals are restricted only to the extent that they have been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenship to the agencies of government, unquote. It's a contract. I can't tell you how many times it's a contract. You've agreed to it. And so we have to learn how that's happening and quit agreeing to it. It's all you got to do is bring up the issue. This is actually a letter from an Arizona state senator. This is dated September 10th, 1985, and the letter is from Arizona senator. It's a state senator, not a federal senator. His name is Wayne Stump, and I have a certified copy of this letter, and it's actually apostilled, which means that the apostille certifies that the notary is a true notary. Anyways. The interesting thing is read this, okay? Listen to this. This is directed to Ralph Milstead, the director of the Department of Public Safety, State of Arizona, and it says, Dear Director Milstead, it has come to my attention that numerous individuals in our state have rescinded all of their contracts with the United States federal government, the state of Arizona, and each of its political subdivisions, establishing themselves as freemen under the organic national constitution of the Republic of the United States of America. Consequently, they may be driving without auto registration, driver's license, or any other evidence of contract. Did you know those are all contracts? That's exactly what they are. Okay, let's read on. It says, quote, because many law enforcement personnel may be unaware of the contractual nature of auto registration and driver's licenses, it is conceivable that this situation may lead to confrontation between these individuals and law enforcement personnel. And then it goes on, I urge you to inform yourself and your personnel about this matter as soon as possible. If you would like to be briefed by someone knowledgeable on this subject, please contact me. In the meantime, inasmuch as this procedure is entirely appropriate when properly carried out, I would like to be personally notified of every such instance of confrontation in order that the persons involved and the public officials involved may be apprised of the correct procedure and the appropriateness of their actions on the part of each concerned. And then he goes, my office number is, and I'm requesting to be notified, and the point is, this is from an Arizona senator. And that's what he's talking about. It's signed on the bottom. This is a certified copy, apostilled. It's signed on the bottom. He sent this out in 1985. It's all by your consent. Quit consenting. That's all you have to do. You have to know what's happening and quit agreeing. Here's a court case. Favet versus Kingsbury, 1929. Found at 98 California Appeals, APP, I guess that's appeals, appellate courts, I guess, page 284. Quote, state citizenship is a vested substantial property right, and the state has no power to divest or impair these rights, unquote. You're the king. They don't have a shred of authority over you. And anything they're doing is they're getting you to agree to it. That's exactly what they do. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Anytime you get anything from the government, it's an implied contract, and it brings you into their jurisdiction. Anytime you register for anything or make application for anything from the government, you're giving them a power of attorney to make legal determinations for you and represent you. You know, what do you think? I mean, think about it. When that cop stops you, I mean, he made a legal determination for you. I mean, he's sitting there saying, oh, there's a person I can stop, right? He accused you of being a person right off the bat, okay? And so how can he make a legal determination for you without representing you? And that's exactly what he did. And so you're making them competent in your affairs. It's all about competence and incompetence. You know, if you hire a lawyer, you're saying, and when I talk about that, when I go through the stuff on lawyers, you're saying, I am not competent. I am a ward of the court. You're turning yourself into a ward of the court. That's exactly what you're doing. And you know, they're not interested in justice. They're interested in their commercial transaction. That's exactly what they are. You know, America's jails have more people, America has more people in prison as a percentage of their population than any other country on the planet. And what do you think is going on? It's because they're making all sorts of money off of that stuff. I guarantee you. I mean, I could just go on and on about this stuff. If you tell them, when you go and apply or register for anything, you're making them competent in your affairs, you're telling them you're a person, you're converting yourself into a slave. If you go to that government bureaucrat and you say, does this apply to me? Well, you're telling them right there, I'm incompetent, I'm an idiot. I want you to tell me if it applies to me. Of course he's going to tell you it applies to you. I can't believe that people do that stuff. But that's exactly what happens. Well, I called them up at the 800 number and they told me I had to do it. Well, of course they're going to. So, how can you lose sovereignty? All statutes are written very carefully and most do not apply to members of the sovereignty. Matter of fact, none of them do. The only ones that apply to you are the ones like for murder, assault, the common law offenses. 99% of the time, the government is technically correct. It's not up to the government to tell you that you're a member of the sovereignty. Do you know who you are? You're supposed to tell them that. The government lawyers make up a statute that properly applies to those entities they have jurisdiction over. The burden's on us. If a member of the sovereignty gets unknowingly involved in something that operates as a contract by which he might lose the sovereignty, he's made a mistake of law and fact. The courts have ruled that the government is not the protector of the Constitution, and we'll talk about that in my practical considerations. It's one of the last presentations that we go through. It's called Practical Considerations, and there's a court case in there that talks about that. Okay, the government is not to protect the Constitution; it's up to the people. The government is not, then who is? It's up to the people. And how do you do that? You do that by challenging what they're doing, and you can do it administratively, or you can do it through the courts. I do it administratively. I find that works the best, but you have to do it in such a way that you can prove it. And some of these judges and stuff are liars and thieves, and so you got to be in a position where you can call him a liar, and that's not an easy thing to do and get away with it. But you have to understand that. Question for Glenn. Okay, is it right for the Archbishop of Canterbury owns all the prisons in the UK? Is it right that he owns all the prisons in the UK? Well, I'm sure he justifies it somehow. They're just a private business, okay? And the Church of England is just another private business. That's all it is. It's just a private business. And so it's like Ford and GM. You know, Ford and GM owns all the prisons in the UK. Whatever, that's nothing to me. I don't care. It's none of my concern. What jerks my chain, quite frankly, is when some of these guys come up and tell me about, and Rice McLeod. When I first started into this, and when I get into some other presentations, I talk about this a little bit. When I first started into this, I've been into this like for 20 years. I first started into it in the early 1990s, and this guy was telling me about the two classes. And I told him, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. I've worked in aviation for 35 years. I started working on airplanes in 1976. And so I deal with law and regulations all day, every day. And so I'm on the law works. Anyways, this guy comes up to me and he starts talking about these two classes. I says, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about." And he brought these court cases out. And I thought, man, if this is true, this is the most fantastic thing there is. And I had to start investigating it. And I did. And that's what I've been doing this was in the early 90s. So what's all the 90s, all the thousands, right? That's 2012. So we're talking, 22 years probably that I've been studying this stuff. And so the point is that I told the guy he was crazy. I said, "You're nuts. You don't know what you're talking about." So, what they're doing is it's like Ford and GM, and I got nothing to say about that. That's their business. Once we understand what's happening, we can refuse to participate. Right now, if you're in the matrix, that's the way you got to think of it. You're in the matrix, okay? I mean, what happened with Neil? Okay, he was stuck participating, and until he learned, and then all of a sudden his eyes were opened. And if you go to my website, www.sovereigntyinternational.info, you'll see the red pill and the blue pill. And so you can go back to the matrix. And actually, I think the red pill, I'm not sure which pill it is, but one of the pills. We changed them recently because it didn't coincide with the movie The Matrix that well, and so it does now. But the pill that takes you out of the Matrix takes you to Disneyland. So it's up to you. Do you wanna learn about this stuff or not? But you'll never be the same. It's up to you. Do you know who you are? So the government's not the protector of the Constitution, we the people are. And how do we do it? We do it by challenging what the government does. The burden's on the sovereigns to know and understand the law and to assert their sovereignty. And that's what you have to do. All contracts must be entered into knowingly, willingly, intentionally. None of them are that way. Matter of fact, it would be treason for them to do that. Okay, so they are just putting this stuff out there. And if you get yourself involved in it, then that's your choice. And they have to assume you know the law until you bring up the issue. Is there a contract here? None of the contracts entered into with the government by which you might lose your sovereignty are willing, intentional, or knowing. It's all Roman law, is what it is. It all comes from the Vatican, and we'll talk about that when I go through my presentation on Roman law and commerce. Sovereignty of the people is unalienable and imprescriptible. Unalienable means it cannot be alienated. Imprescriptible means they cannot make a statute that alienates it. In order to regain your sovereignty, how do you regain it? Well, all you got to do is say the words, "I'm the king," and where's your contract? You watch them dive for cover. They'll scatter. It's like turning the lights on and the roaches scatter. Anyways, when you assert your sovereignty the way with the procedure that I have developed, you're basically building a case with evidence that you can use in court at a future date should you need to do so. And you send all documents by registered mail. I never ever use anything but registered mail when I'm doing this stuff. It's got to be, you got to have proof of service. Registered mail is kept under lock and key, and there's a chain of custody that's kept by the post office. And so it's very important. The government attorneys may turn it over to a bureaucrat who may respond off point, And, quite frankly, again, do you know who you are? If I have some bureaucrat that's making legal determinations for me and representing me, and that's exactly what they're doing, well, then I just file a criminal complaint against them. I can't tell you how many times I've had people removed. The Pennsylvania Attorney General is a perfect example. The Pennsylvania Attorney General, I sent him one of my notices. This was back, probably 2 or 3 years ago, when I was in New York and I was traveling, through Pennsylvania and stuff like that. And so I sent him one of my notices, and one of his hired thugs sent me back a letter. In my notice, okay, I tell him I'm going to be driving in Pennsylvania without a driver's license, and you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-cop. And I just go through my standard stuff that I tell them, right? And so they sent me back a letter saying, well, if you drive in Pennsylvania without a driver's license, we're going to arrest your butt and put you in jail. And they sent me back my letter with all my stamps all over it, saying that I had, that I sent to them. So that was great evidence. That's perfect. Thank you very much. And I attached all that stuff to a criminal complaint for treason, sedition, perjury of oath. I mean, that's exactly what they're engaged in. And I sent it to the U.S. attorney in that area, which in Harrisburg, because Harrisburg's the capital of Pennsylvania. And I sent that to the U.S. attorney. A couple of weeks later, I got a letter saying that they had referred it to the FBI. And then a couple months later, I was looking on the Pennsylvania Attorney General's website, and they had an acting Attorney General there. So we really do have good public servants, but the burden's on us to educate them and to keep them honest. And we have to keep them honest, right? And build a case against them. And 9 times out of 10, they know exactly what you're doing. And so, again, the reason he was an acting Attorney General, if you think about it, is because he got removed before his time was up. And they had an acting Attorney General until they elected a new one. I don't know how long that was. I think it was like about maybe 6 months or a year or something like that. But anyways, if the government, if they were to admit that you were right, they would be admitting to treason, extortion, genocide, multiple indictable offenses. I am telling you, you have no idea. You start bringing this stuff up, and they don't want to talk about it. It's major fatal to them. I'm telling you, they are criminals. If you're the king, they are such a criminal that that they'll never see the light of jail. That Attorney General could be in jail. I guarantee he's fired for sure. But who knows what happened to him? I don't really care. My public servants took care of it, and so whatever, that's fine. Looks like there's another possible question. How does common law relate to juveniles and social services? Well, common law I'm not sure about juveniles, but I know about social services. It has nothing to do with common law, okay? And so what I would be doing as far as social services is concerned is I would just find out who the local bureaucrat is and send them a notice and accept their oath of office. You want the boss. The flunkies probably don't even have oaths of office. And so you want to get the boss. The head boss, like if this is in the UK, you'd probably want to find out who the minister is, and maybe especially the minister and especially the deputy minister, and then find out who the head of the local agency is, and send him a notice. And I accept your oath of office, whether he has one or not. You make one up for him. That's what I do, and you just let him know who you are. And I guarantee you, by the time if you've got your ducks in a row and you let him know who you are, he is going to avoid you like the plague. If you do this properly, they will see you and they will turn and run the other direction. They will not want to have anything to do with you. And that's exactly what will happen. So chances are the government attorneys will not respond at all. I've had positive responses. I've had negative responses. I told you about the one with the Pennsylvania Attorney General. The very first one that I sent out was to the Pinal County Recorder, and she came back with, in my opinion, what was a perfect response. And it's interesting to note that in Pinal County, they told me that they'll record anything. They said they'd record a hamburger if I wanted to pay the fee, and that's great. That's exactly what they should be doing. But she sent me back a letter, and it was very short. And all it said was, I got your document, put it on file for future reference. And then she signed it, and it was signed personally by her. And it was signed most respectfully and signed. And that was it. I mean, that's perfect. That's a perfect response. I had another judge send me a certified copy of his oath of office and surety bond. And that's a perfect response. I would never cause injury to somebody like that. But yeah. So I've got positive responses, and some of them have been negative. And the negative ones, I file a criminal complaint, and the next thing you know, they're gone. The first one that I got that was, and I'm not sure if it was even negative, but I was pissed. I was mad. I was frustrated. I was in the middle of this lawsuit. I had the IRS coming after me and all sorts of stuff going on, and I was mad and frustrated. And so what happened is I had my house. I was going through a foreclosure, and so what happened was I arrested the auctioneer, and the cops came and they started building a case against me for disturbing peace. And so I could see that going on. So I immediately started building a case against them, sending them my notices, I accept your oath of office, all that stuff, right? And so they went and sent their straw man a summons, and I went and attached their summons to the notices that I'd sent them, and made up a criminal complaint. And I recorded it, and then I sent them a copy. And so then they issued a warrant. And the reason I know they issued a warrant is because I called them up and I asked them, and they said they'd issued a warrant. And so I knew something was going to go down. I knew they had a period of time. The warrant has to season. I think it's 30 days or 60 days, depending on which state you're in. And so I knew there was a period of time that it had to season. And I knew they'd have to find me. And I knew they couldn't find me at home because I only use a private mailbox. And so the only place they could find me was my work. And it was Memorial Day weekend. And I came back from lunch, and my two coworkers were there, and they said some big guy was here looking for you. And I figured, I bet I know who that is. And I was already preparing a lawsuit. So I left work early that day, and I had already noticed, city police, the county sheriff, everybody and their brother that I could think of. And the interesting thing is that it's the power of these notices, because none of them would have anything to do with it. Okay, they sent a bounty hunter, and because I was driving out of the parking lot that day, And this guy was driving in, and he had a yellow van that was all caged in inside. And so that's what they did, is they sent a bounty hunter. And so, anyways, what happened was I went home. I took a week's vacation. I filed my lawsuit. I had it. I finished it up and filed it. It was Memorial Day weekend, so that means Monday was a holiday. So Tuesday was first normal business day. And so I went and filed the lawsuit on Tuesday, got the case number, and then I sent a registered letter to the chief judge of the Supreme Court, because I'd been administrating her and telling her, you got some criminals operating in Pinal County and all this, right? And so I sent her a letter, and I said, and I went through and explained everything that had been going on, and I said, I hereby demand that you quash this warrant for the arrest of strawman vessel. I said, quote, because we all know that the corporate commercial agents, the police in brackets, are too stupid to tell the difference between a sovereign living soul and a strawman vessel, unquote. And I said, furthermore, if you fail to quash this warrant for the arrest of the strawman vessel, it'll be further proof of your dereliction of duty to regulate your subordinates. And I said, furthermore, I filed this lawsuit, and this is the case number, and you're named in it, and you're going to get served with it soon enough. But if you fail to quash this warrant for the arrest of the strawman vessel, it'll be further proof of your dereliction of duty. Anyways, and the Attorney General responded to the Chief Judge in the lawsuit. I sued the Attorney General too, by the way. But the Attorney General responded to the Chief Judge in the lawsuit, and it's always an Assistant Attorney General. The Attorney General himself never responds. But so the Assistant Attorney General responded, and in their response, they said it was perfectly appropriate that I petition the Chief Justice to get the warrant quashed. And I was pissed at that time. I was mad and frustrated and everything else. So what happened is I immediately they said the plaintiff is what they accused me of being a plaintiff, and so what I did was I told them in the lawsuit, I said, I'm not a plaintiff, I'm not a person, I'm not any of these things. And so then they immediately started accusing me of being a plaintiff. And so I filed a criminal complaint against this Assistant Attorney General for perjury of oath, treason, sedition. The very next piece of paper they filed into that case, the very next one, they said they'd been transferred to a different department and someone else is going to be handling that case. That's the power. You have no idea the power, I'm telling you. If you bring up the right issues and just knowing the right issues to bring up, and you just watch them scatter like roaches, I'm telling you, you have no idea. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that. You already heard about the Pennsylvania Attorney General. I mean, I can't tell you how many times. I filed a criminal complaint against Alberto Gonzalez, former U.S. Attorney General, and I attached it to a petition for a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court. 2 weeks later, he resigned. He said he was hiring attorneys to defend himself from the Department of Justice. I'm telling you, you have no idea the power. Anyways, keep moving. In order to be true sovereign, you must be self-reliant. And this is one thing I like about Ravana, because he talks about it on this program. He doesn't talk about it, well, I don't know if he does or not, but you hear his chickens crowing in the background when he's on talk radio. And man, that's great. I wish I could do that. I travel around so much, I got no room for that kind of stuff, but I would love to be in a position where I could have some chickens. And so 3 cheers for Ravana, and that's what you gotta do. You gotta be self-reliant. You can't be going to the government for anything, okay? The king doesn't go to the government for anything. And that's the bottom line. It's the bottom line. You cannot go to the government for anything. And you have to be the king. You have to know who you are. You got to be knowledgeable about the law and how it works. You got to be prepared to take the initiative to court if necessary, and you got to make it known and know in certain terms that you're all of the above. And if you do that, they don't want to talk to you. I guarantee you. But you got to do that. That's what you got to do. It is all about slavery. It's not about race. A U.S. citizen or a citizen of Canada or a citizen of Australia is a slave. Okay, they're property. Either you're the king or you're a slave, and there is nothing in between. If you participate in their color of law statutes, then you've agreed to be their slave. And it is only involuntary servitude, slavery, which is not lawful. I mean, you have the right to be a slave if you want to be a slave. And here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, expects what never was and never will be," unquote. And that's, Americans really don't know who they are. And that's the sad part about it, because America is a great place. I love it here. And Americans just do not know who they are. And how, think about it. How on earth can you possibly know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? How on earth can you possibly know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And that's the end of this presentation, actually. So it looks like we'll get started on the next one, which is going to be color of law. And if anybody's got any questions, now's the time. Sounds like there's some questions coming across. No, I don't think I need to take a break. It's we got about a half hour left and we're done anyways. Next one's color of law. And we're going to talk about how everything's color of law, how they don't have any authority. And when you start pointing this stuff out, they don't want to talk to you anymore because you put them in a position of estoppel where they cannot proceed. And if you have any questions, look up the de facto officer doctrine because they're all de facto. Anyways, and color of law, my color of law presentation has Roman law next to it, okay, because it's all Roman law. It all comes from the Vatican. There's color of law, color of money, color of justice, color of title. Everything is color, okay, and what's color? Well, we're going to talk about that. Here's a quote. It is one of the fundamental maxims of common law that ignorance of the law excuses no one, unquote. And that's Daniels versus Dean, 1905, found at 2 CA, California Appeals, page 421. So common law says that ignorance of the law excuses no one. There's two kinds of law. There's positive law and there's non-positive law. Okay, this is legislative law we're talking about. Positive law is law passed with legitimate authority. It's law passed to protect the rights of the people. And non-positive law is colorable legislation, and it applies to certain groups of people and does not apply to sovereign citizens, and it operates as a contract. Positive law, this is taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, quote, "Positive law actually and specifically adopted by proper authority for the government of an organized general society." Proper authority. That is the most important part of all of that. Let's see here. It says here, is that the same things as lawful? Same thing? Positive law, yeah, would be lawful. That's right. Yes. Non-positive law is not lawful. And if you go in the United States, if you go to the Office of Law Revision Council, which is a website that's on the U.S. House of Representatives, okay? It's one of their websites. And it says here, it says, quote, "Certain titles of the Code have been enacted into positive law pursuant to Section 204 of Title I of the Code. The text of those titles is legal evidence of the laws contained in those titles. The other titles of the Code are prima facie evidence of the laws contained in those titles." Prima facie. Okay, that's one of the words that we're going to have to think about. It's Latin. Okay, Latin as in Roman law. Okay, you're going to see some Latin words here, and that's because of all the Roman law. Okay, but so The ones that we're concerned with are the non-positive law titles, and we'll go through some of those right now. For example, Title VI, domestic security. If you don't like how you're being treated by the Transportation Security Administration, well, they have no authority, okay? So what do? That's the basis of what you go after them for. Then you guys don't have, you're not positive law. You don't have any authority, and they don't. Title VII, agriculture, is not positive law. Aliens and nationality, Title VIII, is not positive law. That's why they can't do anything to the so-called illegal immigrants. I went and sent a registered letter to every member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary, which is about 17 senators. And I told them that you guys are perjuring your oath of office by calling these people illegal aliens, because they are actually state citizens. Once they come across the border, they are state citizens. And they have more rights than anybody that thinks they're a U.S. citizen. And you're perjuring your oath of office by calling them illegal aliens. Well, now you hear them, like even Barack Obama and those guys are saying that it's not politically correct to call them illegal aliens. and this was like a couple of years ago when I did this, or more, maybe like about 4 or 5 years ago, in fact. Anyways, what happened was these senators got out on national TV and they started calling them undocumented workers. Yeah, that's true. Anyways, so Title VIII, United States Code, is not positive law. That's aliens and nationality. Title 12, banking. Okay, there are banking regulations that say that U.S. citizens have to produce a Social Security number. It's not positive law. Title 15, trade and commerce, is not positive law. Title 19, customs and duties, is not positive law. Title 20, education, is not positive law. Title 21, food and drugs, not positive law. I mean, there's so many of them here that are not positive law. Get a load of this one. Title 26, internal revenue, is not positive law. Okay? They don't have a shred of authority. Nothing. Title 25, Indians, is not positive law. Title 27, liquors, intoxicating liquors. Title 29, labor. The Labor Department is not positive law. They have no authority. Title 42, which is public health and welfare. The Social Security Act is not positive law. There's no law that says you have to get a Social Security number. I've even got letters from Social Security administrators that say there's no law that says you have to get a Social Security number. Don't get me going. And then Title 50, War and National Defense, not positive law. Okay. These are the kinds of things you need to bring up. Okay. Anyways, the Income Tax Act in Canada. Okay, in Canada, some of the stuff is not positive law. The Income Tax Act is not positive law. Matter of fact, it's the Income Tax Bill is what it is. And the same thing, the British North America Bill is not positive law. Okay, so all it is a bill. It means absolutely nothing. The Customs Act, the Immigration Act, same thing in Canada. Okay, the Highway Traffic Act in Ontario. There was somebody that sent an email, and they actually admitted it, that the Highway Traffic Act was signed by the clerk of the court, and that was it. And so there's no royal assent. In Ontario, they have to have royal assent if they're going to be positive law. And Canada even. Okay, there's no royal assent, so it's not positive law. The king or the governor general or the lieutenant governor knows what the positive law is and knows what is properly enacted. And there's certain things that have to happen in order for a bill to be properly enacted. And in other words, it has to have a preamble, okay? Any legislation has to have a preamble. It has to have certain things. It's supposed to be read in Parliament 3 times, okay? In the U.S., it's read in the House, in the Senate 3 times. And if it's not, those things aren't done, then it's not positive law. And And some of it they deliberately do that way because they have no intention of making it positive law, because it would be treason for them to make it positive law, like the Customs Act. They have no authority, or the Homeland Security Act. They have no authority over we the people, not a shred of authority. Anyways, non-positive law statutes are martial law statutes, okay? And we're going to talk about that, okay? Martial law is another presentation. We won't talk about it today. But, a few weeks down the road when we have this program, we'll be talking about the martial law. Non-positive laws have no authority and mean absolutely nothing. They mean nothing. But the burden's on you to bring it up, okay? It's like if you're walking down the street and somebody comes up to you and says, you owe me $50. If you give them the $50, well, then you must have owed it. That's exactly what the IRS does, or CRA, Revenue Canada. That's exactly what they do. And people fork over thousands of dollars. Is there any defect in the legislation? If there is any defect in the legislation, then there is no act. A friend of mine that taught me about court procedure in Toronto correctly calls the BNA Act the BNA bill, because that's all it is. It means absolutely nothing. Colorability. This is taken from a book called The Constitutional Law of Canada by P.W. Hogg. Quote, colorability, a doctrine invoked when a statute is addressed to a matter outside jurisdiction, though it bears the formal trappings of a matter within jurisdiction of the enacting legislature. And that's P.W. Hogg. Colorable. This is Dictionary of Canadian Law. Colorable in appearance, but not in substance what it claims to be. Right? Well, here's some other good definitions. Color. This is taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, on page 240. Okay. Color means an appearance, a semblance, a simulacrum, as distinguished from that which is real. A prima facie or apparent right, hence a deceptive appearance, a plausible assumed exterior, concealing a lack of reality, a disguise or a pretext. See also colorable, unquote. You know, at the very beginning of this presentation, I said that we have color of law, color of money, color of justice, color of all sorts of things. And now, in light of this definition, that's exactly what it is, okay? It's not real justice. It's not real law. It's not real money. It's a fraud, is what it is, okay? And the important thing is a prima facie. Remember, that's one of the words that we were talking about. Remember, it said in the Office of Law Revision Counsel is that the non-positive law statutes are prima facie evidence of the laws, okay? A prima facie or apparent right, apparent, hence a deceptive appearance, okay? Something that has the appearance of a law, but it's not. That's exactly what they're saying, okay? When it's not positive law, it has the appearance of law. When they say it's prima facie evidence, okay, they're saying that it's something that looks like law, but it's not. That's exactly what they're saying. Colorable means that which is in appearance only, but not in reality what it purports to be. Hence, counterfeit, feigned, having the appearance of truth, unquote. That's Wendell versus Flynn, 196, Oregon Reports, page 654. Color of law, this is Atkins versus Lanning, and that's D.C., U.S. District Court for Oklahoma, page 415, Federal Supplements, it's 415, book 415, Federal Supplements, page 186. Anyways, color of law means the appearance or semblance without the substance of legal right, misuse of power possessed by virtue of state law, and made possible only because wrongdoers clothed with authority of state is action taken under color of law, unquote. Okay? They don't have any authority. I can't tell you that how many times. They don't have any authority. Prima facie, remember we talked about that. Quote, prima facie, at first sight, on first appearance, on the face of it, so far as can be judged from the first disclosure, presumably. There's another word, okay? Presume. Presumably, a fact presumed to be true unless disproved by some evidence to the contrary, unquote. And that's what my procedure does, is it creates evidence to the contrary. Okay, they already know that you're the sovereign, but when you start coming in there with evidence that shows that they know it before they even attacked you, now you've got them for perjury of oath, because the courts have given them what's known as qualified immunity. And so they have immunity. They have a get-out-of-jail-free card that they can use once. And so they can go ahead and abuse you and violate your rights once and get away with it, unless you take away their presumptions. And that's what my documents are designed to do. And so you got to understand that if you have to go on the attack, you have to go after them, and you have to let them know that there's, in no uncertain terms, that if they're messing with you, that it's going to be their worst nightmare. Anyways, this is taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, page 1071. So again, we'll look at it. It says, prima facie, quote, prima facie, at first sight, on the first appearance, on the face of it, so far as can be judged from the first disclosure, presumably, a fact presumed to be true unless disproved by some evidence to the contrary, unquote. Quote, the code is only prima facie evidence of the laws of the United States, where an inconsistency between the United States Code and the statutes at large appears, the statutes at large prevail over the code, unquote. And that's Pert versus Motor Vessel Bearing Explorer, and that's 373 Federal Supplements 927, April 12, 1974. So what they're essentially saying is that the non-positive law statutes, okay, remember at the very beginning here we're talking about non-positive law versus positive law. The non-positive law codes are not in the statutes, okay? Those will not be in the statutes at large. That's why they're called non-positive law. And so therefore, because they're not in the statutes at large, then the statutes at large is what they can hold you to. They cannot hold you to the code. Code means nothing. The code is not law. The code is just somebody's interpretation of what the law is. And it means absolutely nothing. The law is what matters. Quote, it is well settled that the code cannot prevail over the statutes at large when the two are inconsistent, unquote. The provisions of the code are merely prima facie evidence of the laws. Remember, they said at first look, from the first appearance, right? Until some evidence shows that it's not, right? So if IRS or Revenue Canada sends you a letter and you don't dispute that, in other words, you challenge your statute's not positive law, so what are you sending me stuff for? Or you send the minister something up front telling them that it's not positive law before they even think of communicating with you. And then when they do communicate with you, you get the minister for perjury of oath, treason, sedition, and you file a criminal complaint against his butt and watch the heads roll. And that's exactly what happens. But that's what you got to understand is prima facie evidence, and that is it, nothing more. And prima facie evidence can be defeated. And that's found at American Export Lines, Inc. versus United States at 290 Federal Reports, the second edition, page 925, 1961. Quote, but the legislature specifically disclaimed any intention to change the meaning of any statute. The compilers of the code were not empowered by Congress to amend existing law, and doubtless had no thought of doing so. The act before us does not purport to amend a section of an act, but only a section of a compilation entitled Revised Code of Washington, which is not the law. Such an act purporting to amend only a section of the prima facie compilation leaves the law unchanged. And that's Washington State Court of Appeals. And so the revised code, okay, any code is not the law. Any code, I don't care what code it is, it's not the law. Quote, An unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights, it imposes no duties, affords no protection, it creates no office. It is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Unquote. It means absolutely nothing. This is Norton versus Shelby County, 118 U.S. 425, U.S. Supreme Court. Absolute nullity. Civil law. This is Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. Absolute nullity, quote, absolute nullity, civil law, an act that is void because it is against public policy, law, or order. The nullity is non-curable. It may be invoked by any party or by the court. And it also means the state of such nullity. And that's unquote. And I've seen lawyers go into court, government attorneys go into court, and when you start bringing up the fact that there's no contract here, then they'll come out and they'll say, I've seen them where they'd actually say, there is no contract, it is a nullity. Okay? That's right, because it's treason for them to get you into a contract. Justum generis. This is a maxim of law used to interpret loosely written statutes, where a law lists specific classes of persons or thing and then refers to them in general. The general statements only apply to the same kind of persons or things specifically listed. Example, if a law refers to automobiles, trucks, tractors, motorcycles, and other motor-powered vehicles, vehicles would not include airplanes, since the list was of land-based transportation. So, based on a justum generis, at Title 26, United States Code, Section 7701A1, a person is defined as, it says, person. The term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. Based on the law of the justum generis, can anybody tell me what a individual is? Does anybody want to answer that? I can tell you that an individual is a fictitious entity, because all the rest of them are fictitious entities. An individual, a trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. Therefore, an individual is a type of a fictitious entity. So that's not me. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case, Montello Salt versus Utah. That's found at 221 U.S. 455. Include or the participial form thereof is defined to comprise within, to hold, to contain, enclose, comprise, comprehend, embrace, involve. That means it's limiting. So when they go and pass a statute that says that, remember, we'll go back to that Title 26 United States Code, it says person, the term person shall construe to mean and include an individual, a trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. That means that it's nothing else. Expressio unius exclusio alterius. And this is Latin again. And remember, we're talking Roman law, because this is all color of law, and it all comes from Roman law, and that's why we use Latin. It's a canon of construction holding that to express and include one thing implies the exclusion of the other, or the alternative. For example, the rule that each citizen is entitled to vote implies that non-citizens are not entitled to vote. Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition, page 1750. Now, in these presentations I show, and some of them you're not seeing it because I'm not describing it, but I'm describing it now. Anyways, there's two kinds of definitions, okay, or on a court case. Some of them are actual quotes out of the court case. There's two types of citations, I should say, where it's an actual quote out of the court case, or it could also be a summary of what the case says. And this is an actual quote from U.S. versus Vinker, which is 350 U.S. 179, 1956. And the quote is this, quote, But the subpoena is in the form of an official command, and even though improvidently issued, it has some coercive tendency, either because of ignorance of their rights on the part of those whom it purports to command, or their natural respect for what appears to be an official command, or because of their reluctance to test the subpoena's validity by litigation, unquote. And so that's the quote, okay? But I like the summary way better, and I'll read you the summary next. And that's this as follows. Because of their respect for what appears to be a law, many people are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights due to ignorance. And that is so true. And again, do you know who you are? And you have to assert your rights. I cannot assert them for you. You have to do it. Okay. Here's another site. 5 minutes, yes, I understand. Here's another site. This is taken from Penhallow versus Doan's Administrators, and that's found at 3 U.S. 54, 1795, U.S. Supreme Court again. Quote, a distinction was taken at the bar between a state and the people of a state. It is a distinction I am not capable of comprehending. And then it goes on, before I say unquote, it goes on in about a 2-page diatribe and explains why. Okay, he cannot comprehend it, unquote. And we're not going to go into that because it's way too much. And I have a summary that says it and says it very well. Okay, and this is the summary. And this is, again, a summary of Penhallow versus Doan's Administrators at 3 U.S. 54, 1795. And this is the summary. Inasmuch as every government is an artificial person, an abstraction, and a creature of the mind only, a government can interface only with other artificial persons. The imaginary, having neither actuality nor substance, is foreclosed from creating and attaining parity with the tangible. The legal manifestation of this is that no government, as well as any law, agency, aspect, court, etc., can concern itself with anything other than corporate, artificial persons and the contracts between them. And that is why they have to convert your name. They cannot see you. It's the matrix again, okay? The government is the matrix. The courts is the matrix. It's the illusion. It's the matrix. They have nothing to say to we the people. They haven't got a shred of authority over we the people. They never have had a shred of authority over we the people. And if you know who you are, they won't even want to talk to you because you could, again, you could have them in jail. And I've done that exactly. Okay. Here's another summary. This is Rodriguez versus Donovan, and that's found at 769 Federal Reports 2D, page 1344. And the summary is all codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lacking in due process. And I think it's time now to go through. I have a website. If anybody wants to know more about this stuff, next week we'll be going through this Call of Law one and maybe part of another one. But I have a website. It's www.sovereigntyinternational.info. And you can also, I have some groups administrating your public servants. Both groups are the private groups, so you cannot get any information unless you join the group. But they're administrating your public servants in separate words. And it's not all one word. At Yahoo and at Google, okay? There's also a group on These Changing Times website as well. So if you go on the website and you go to the groups link, my group is called sovereigntyinternational.info. And you'll have my contact information in there and my website and some files that I've uploaded, and you can contact me if you have questions there. That one's actually It's private in that you have to be a member on these Changing Times Radio's website, but other than that, it's pretty well open. So you can get stuff there too. I do private information shares. The stuff we've been covering today is taken from one of the about 10 or 11 presentations that I do when I do my private information shares. And so if anybody's interested and wants me to come and do one, I'm available for that. It's a good day. Maybe even a day and a half. I haven't done one recently, and I've been expanding these presentations quite a bit with a lot of new information. So I would say a very long day, and maybe even a day plus. And a lot of it depends on questions I get to. If anybody has any questions, you can contact me on the group, on the These Changing Times radio group. Or you can send me an email at engineerwin@gmail.com, and you can reach me there. Other than that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Patty.
Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight for Do You Know Who You Are with Glenn Winningham. Please stay tuned. We will have Beyond the Looking Glass with Ravana starting at 10 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll see you on the other side. Good night, everybody.